your garage be attached to your home? Yes or no, and why or why not? I'm going to be answering that question today. But first, I'm Christine. I'm a licensed GC here in Southern California and holistic construction consultant, helping families all over the US build healthier homes for their families. And a big topic that comes up is the garage. Not many people even know to think of this as a consideration. Most every home today that's built, homeowners want direct access from the garage to the living space. There used to be carports, there used to be no garages at all, but now seems like the demand is to have direct access. And it's definitely a luxury, but there's things to consider when you're making this decision if you are planning a new build. If you have an existing home, it's going to be pretty hard to transform your garage to be detached if it's already attached. So I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of that we have some flexibility here in the design and planning to consider if you want the garage attached or detached, which would be the alternative option. So why is this even a topic? Why does this even play into if a home is healthy or potentially going to have issues with air infiltration? It's because of the way that we use our garages. So we're not talking about an ADU or an additional structure. We're talking about a garage that is typically used to store cars, chemicals, paints. I'm sure many of you are not using pesticides on your lawns, but it's a storage space for a lot of equipment and tools and machinery. You might have gas cans of gasoline in there to power equipment. You might be living on a farm that needs a garage that's going to be storing some sort of chemicals or additional fuel and diesel. Everyone uses their garage differently, but across the board, garages are not living spaces. So even in the planning and design stage, they are considered separate square footage. So when you're planning your home and it gets sent to the building department, you have livable square footage and then you have garage space. Those are always considered separate spaces. So when you're considering, should my garage be attached or detached, the first thing is, how do you want the home to function? Are you living in a very cold climate where you do not want to be parking your car in your garage and then walking outside to get into your home? That's very understandable. But so first consider which one you would like to have from just a usability standpoint. But I'm going to give you the considerations, or the case rather, for considering doing a detached garage and why that is a better idea. But also, I'm going to touch on, if we got to make it attached to the home, here's some things to consider. So when you have the garage attached to the home, is there actually much communication between the living space and the garage? And the reality is there actually is, because code requires there to be a firewall between the garage and the living space. So this means that if there's a garage, God forbid, in the garage, it's not going to just blow through and get to the living space. Usually there's at least a 1 hour firewall. That has to do with the materials that are used in the wall construction. So that could be the type of drywall that is used, that could be the type of insulation, could be the wall thickness. But what's not being considered is how air is moving through the living space in the garage. And because of the living space, which is designed to be watertight and semi-airtight, by nature of just volume exchange, the interior living space is going to want to pull in air from the garage. So if the living space is put under what's called negative pressure, meaning it's kind of squeezing for some air, it's going to pull it from its closest resource, which is the garage, typically around the door of your garage or even through the walls. So one of the best considerations if you're going to do an attached garage is air sealing. So we have the firewall mandate that should be non-negotiable, need to have that fire protection, but secondarily to that is managing the air infiltration. So you can see if we detach the garage, air infiltration, not an issue when it comes to the garage, but if we're going to attach it, got to manage the air. So that's number one. The second layer to that is, in the planning stages of your home, are you using the space above your garage? If you have a 2-story home, are you using the space above your garage for living space? Well, now, instead of just between garage and living space, You also have to consider ceiling of garage and floor of living space. So consider where you need to have that air sealing between garage and living space. Okay, the next piece to this is it is much simpler to get continuity of your enclosure, which are all the exterior walls of your home. It's much simpler to get continuity of that when your garage is detached. So you can have, if you are doing exterior zip sheathing, and then you're doing exterior rigid insulation, and you can get all of that on all of the sides of your home. There's this continuous water control and air control, thermal control layer. It's all in uniform together. And then the garage is detached, and that's treated separately. It may not need to have the same exterior rigid insulation and details that your living space does. So it is tricky to separate the living space with this continuity when the garage is attached. So just know that that's a little bit of a implementation thing that needs to be worked through in the field, is to actually make sure that you're air sealing off that garage from the living space. Alternatively, and what we really like to work towards in the planning stages with the architect, is can we get the garage detached enough and have a breezeway? So a breezeway means that if you were to look at the exterior elevation, there's uniformity there. It might even share the same roof line, but you have a breezeway, which is just covering between your living space and the garage. So they're connected, but they're not attached. They don't share a wall. That's our favorite way to see detached garages, because it still feels like it's connected to the home, but not sharing any exterior walls. The other thing to consider if you're in the planning stages is garage space functions completely different than living space. Living space, we want to create that as watertight, airtight. Garages, they need to be ventilated. Think of if you were to park your car in a garage, the engine accidentally got left on, or you were sitting there idle for a bit too long, those combustion gases and fumes are going to build up. That's why garages are naturally ventilated. So it's functioning completely different than your home. So that's another plus in the column for detached garages, because you're just talking about two different spaces and how they function. Okay, so your thought might be, well, I have an attached garage. It's not that big of a deal. I don't notice anything different. But let me tell you about a case that happened earlier this year. It was in Vegas, and there was a news report about an Airbnb home that was being used in Vegas, and the home itself was rented out, but the garage was locked and nobody could go in the garage. Not unusual for an Airbnb, it's just a section of the home was locked. The garage turned out to be used as some sort of chemical lab of some sort. And the way it was discovered is because a cleaning crew came in to clean the Airbnb multiple times, and at some point the owner of the home had asked the cleaning crew to put something in the garage. So they did. They discovered what looked like a lab was going on in there. They called the FBI, and then this case unfolded. Well, what she then reported is that she became very, very sick for months prior to finding out that there was a laboratory in the garage of the space. But she became so sick just from cleaning the interior part of the home routinely. I don't know how often, but this was something that occurred in Vegas, and there was a short duration of time where a cleaning lady was in the home. She wasn't even living in the home, and she became really sick because of what was happening within the garage. So they're all going to be designed and built differently, but garages are still communicating with the rest of the home when they're attached. So the best things that you can do if it's going to be attached is proper fire rating of your walls, the ceiling, anything that's connected between the garage and the living space, proper fire rating, paying attention to air sealing. So you could even do a follow-up blower door test, which tests air infiltration between the garage and the living space. Air sealing is going to be very vital for homes that are connected like this. And then also insulating. Even soundproofing might be a factor here. but you want to treat it as it's a completely separate space. So that's if you already have an existing home, or maybe you're renovating an existing home. If you're going to be building a new home and it's going to have an attached garage, consider building the shell of the exterior of the home first and then framing the portion of the garage. So that allows you to get continuity of your sheathing, of your air barrier, of waterproofing layer. You can have all of these fire rating layers, everything in place, and then the framing for the garage goes on. Not always possible, but if sequenced correctly, that should work really well so that you can still have this proper barrier between the living space. And then if you're still in the planning stages of a new construction project, be open to doing a detached garage. It's a huge benefit and win when you can have your living space just be your living space. It also allows a bit of a bonus if that we can plan it enough so that the electrical panel can live on this detached garage. So again, your living space is your living space, and you don't have to end up with an electrical panel at the headboard of your bedroom. If we can get it on this detached garage, chemicals stay in the garage, cars and their fumes stay in that garage, and it's not sharing any space with your healthy home. So that's our case for the 3 different scenarios of garages and living spaces. A follow-up question to that is likely going to be, well, how do I manage the temperature and humidity in that garage? You do not want mechanical equipment communicating between your garage and your living space. So if it's detached, or even if it is attached, you want to have that functioning separately. Most commonly, we see it functioning off of a mini split. I don't love those units, but in garages, they're not run very routinely. But that is one way that you can still make it a usable space so that it's cool enough to enjoy in the summer months. But you don't want mechanical equipment, certainly don't want air communicating between the 2 spaces. So consider if your garage could actually be a detached space from your home. So I hope this episode was helpful for you to start considering how your garage and your living space are communicating, or if I caught you early enough in the planning stages to possibly reconsider. But if this episode was helpful for you and you'd like to see more, please subscribe. You can also reach out to us on Instagram at Holistic Homes by Christine, where I share a ton of free content. If you ever have any questions, you can reach out to us there.